this video, I'm going to show you how to make this miniature composite effect in Photoshop by focusing on 5 things. 1, how to cut out your subjects. 2, how to resize or scale them to match the image. 3, how to add shadows and highlights. 4, how to create fake depth of field in your image. And 5, how to blend them together to make it look more real. All right, so obviously the first thing you need to do is make sure your background image allows for the composite to be a miniature effect. So we know how big books are, so anything we place around the books that is not proportional to that, like people are much bigger than books, so if we place small people in, it allows us to create that kind of miniature world effect or look. And then the only other thing you want to make sure of is that when you go to collect the images that you're going to cut out and place in here, you want to make sure that they were photographed at the same angle, or at least close to the same angle as your main image. So in this case, my main image was photographed at kind of eye level. So you want to make sure that your other pictures that you're bringing in were photographed also at eye level. All right, so let's start by me showing you how to cut out your images. So I'm going to zoom in a bit, and I'm just going to go over to the 4th tool down here. This is the quick selection tool. If you don't see it, right click. You might see magic wand or something over here. So quick selection tool, and then just go up here to select subject. I'm going to click on that, and then Photoshop's going to do a pretty good job of making a selection around my subject. If you have a spot like this, like right on his shorts here, I think that's part of his shorts that's sticking out up top there. So a part that's missing like this, then you're going to use the plus up here. So I'm going to go and shrink the size down just a bit, and you can add that back into the selection. So I think that's part of the shorts, but if it's not, if you have a part that sticks out like this that you don't want, then you're going to go to the minus and just kind of paint it down until you got it down to the selection that you want. And you can go back and forth as many times as you need to get the proper selection. Get it pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then just go up here and click on select and mask, and it'll bring you to this screen right here. I'm going to control minus to zoom out so I can see all of it. And then in here, I'm really just going to do a few things. So I'm going to start by going to smooth and going to about halfway. Then I'm just going to scoot feather over just a bit, just a touch, maybe to about 1 pixel. Then I'm going to go down to shift edge, and I'm going to go pretty far on that this time. I'm going to go to like minus maybe 50%. And then I'm going to go over here to the second tool down, and this one that's called the, if it pops up here, refine edge brush tool. And I'm just going to use that one to, I'm going to maybe zoom back in. I'm going to use that one just around hair. So anything that's kind of got a different kind of texture to it, like hair that's, you know, a little bit more fine of a detail, I'm just going to paint in there, and sometimes it works good, sometimes it doesn't, but it creates more of a natural kind of edge on your hair, and it might select some of the fine detail of hair if you do it right. Then I'm going to go over to output 2 and change selection to layer mask and click OK. Now at this point you can see that the hair did a pretty good job. I lost those kind of strands over here, but that's okay. And if we go down to the shoe, you know, it's a little bit deformed here. So anything that you want to clean up, you just click on your mask. So not on the thumbnail part, click on the mask, and then you're going to use the brush tool, and then you're just going to flick between black and white down here. So black, if you notice here, the stuff that's black is what's covered up or has been erased, and whatever's white is what we have left or has been revealed through the mask. So I'm going to start by using black, and I'm going to change my brush size. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit, and I'm going to bring my hardness to around 75 or so, and I'm just going to clean up the shoe. So if you notice here, as I go along the edge of the shoe, I can use the black one as the eraser. So I can kind of repaint around the shoe to kind of form it to be a better look. I'm going to go up here, see if there's anything else. All of this looks pretty good. Maybe here I can get rid of some of the hair or bring some of the hair back. So I go to white to bring a little bit of this kind of back in there. So it looks, I lost kind of part of his head, so I can bring that back in the same way that if you, let's say there was a chunk missing here, you can use white to also just bring that, you know, back. So you can have it like that as well. So the next thing we need to do is bring this character over to our main image. So to do that, what we're going to do is go to our move tool up at the top here, click on it, And then you are going to, now you can move this character around. And then all you're going to do is click on them and hold the click down, drag it up to whatever your main image tab is. So this is my main image. I'm still holding the click down. I'm going to drag it in and then let go. And there's the first thing that we have cut out. Now in this case, I also want to cut out the backboard, which is gone right now. So what I'm going to do is click on that, the main thumbnail layer here, and go Control J to make a copy. And then I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to go delete layer mask. So now I've brought my original image back, but this gives me a chance now to cut out something different, which is the backboard here. So I'm going to zoom in, and this time I could try this again. Like I could try the select subject, but it's going to select him, right? So this time I'm actually going to use the pen tool down here. So right click, you might see any one of these, just use pen tool. And this one, wherever you click, it's just going to put a dot, and then when you click again, it'll make a new line. So I'm just going to go to every single kind of corner that I have here surrounding the object, which is the backboard that I want to cut out. So I probably should have zoomed in a little bit more, but I don't have to be super accurate at this. I can clean it up later if I need. So I'm just going to go around every single corner and click a dot right there. If you have curves, you can click and then drag it out and it'll curve around, so you can make a more precise selection if you want there. I'm gonna just undo that because I don't have curves. And then when you click back at the exact spot that you started, you're gonna have to right click in there and go down to this part that says make selection. So it's gonna turn it from those pen lines to a selection. And I'm just gonna feather radius 2. That's good enough for me because my edges are pretty sharp. If you have something that's more of like people or whatever that you're doing, then you might have to increase that radius a little bit more and click OK. This time, once you have your selection, you can just go right down here and add a mask, this box with a little circle on it. Just click on it and it puts on a mask. Now we have a separate object, which we can go back to our move tool, click on it, drag it up to our other image, our main image, drag it in, and then let go. And then you're just going to do the exact same process for everything else that you want to bring in. So I've already cut these two out, so I'm just going to click and drag them in and drop them in. You're going to see that they are much bigger. Then the next one here, this guy swimming, drag him in, drop him on. He's also bigger. And then the last one here, this guy looking, I'm going to drag him in and drop him over here. And there you go. That's all of my objects that I'm going to use in my composite. All right, so now that we have all of our objects cut out and brought into our main project onto this canvas here, we are just going to resize and scale everything so that it kind of matches and looks like it's one main composite. So the first thing I'm going to do is just move these ones out of the way for a second, because this basketball guy is about the size that I want everything. So to move anything, you just click on it and you can just move it wherever you want. So I'm going to move this basketball hoop kind of onto the top of this lamp post thing here. And I'm just going to use my arrow keys to kind of nudge it into place where I want it. And then I'm just going to place him kind of in there like that. Now, just be aware that whatever's at the top here, that's going to be most in the foreground. So that's going to be in the front of everything else. And whatever's down here is going to be in the background. So if I did want to overlap these, if I move this guy, kind of with the basketball backboard here, then he's going to be behind it because his layer is below the backboard. But if I want to bring him above, then I just click on it and drag till I see that blue line, let go, and now he'd be in front. So if you don't see one of your images, it's probably because it's down at the bottom or underneath a different layer, okay? So I'm going to move him back to where I kind of want him, about right there. And then I'm going to deal with this guy next. So this guy, if I bring him over and kind of match him up, he's just a little bit too big because he's going to be a little bit more in the background over here. So things that are further away are obviously going to be smaller than things that are more to the front here. So if he's over here, I'm just going to go Control T and then make sure that this chain thing is clicked. Don't have it unchecked like that. Click it so it's like this. And then I'm just going to go to the corner and scale him down. If you need to rotate anything, just go to the outside like this to be able to rotate. I don't need to. I'm going to keep it right like that. And I'm going to scale him down. Just make sure he's a little bit smaller than this guy and kind of place him over here. Again, with my arrow keys, I'll just kind of nudge him into place so it looks like he's looking at this guy playing basketball a little bit. When I'm good, then just click check up here. Okay, next I'll quickly deal with the swimmer. I'm just going to move them out of the way again. Click on the swimmer, Control T, scale him down, try and match him up with this guy a little bit over here. And I'm just going to place him kind of down right here on the table because I'm going to blend the water in with the table to make it look like he's swimming on top of the desk or table here, okay? And then just click check. And then these two, I don't want them on the same layer. So what I'm gonna do is scale them first, so Control T, and I'm gonna position just the guy here, okay? So I'll do the same thing. I'll kind of match him up with what I think is the right kind of scale, right size, so about like that. I'm gonna have him sitting on the edge of this book. It's kind of angled, so it'll be like a corner kind of sticking out right there that he might be sitting on, kind of like, you know, something like that. And then I'll click check. Now, the problem is that she's sitting way over here. So to fix that, because I want them on separate layers so I can move her to sit up here. So I'm going to click on this layer and go Control J to duplicate it. I'm going to click on the eyeball of the original on the bottom one here. And then on the mask on the top one, so we can see the both of these are the same, right? So on the copy layer, I'm going to use a brush, make sure it's black, make sure the size is fairly high up and the hardness doesn't really matter. And you're just going to paint over her to erase this one side. Then you're going to do the opposite for the other one. So I'm going to click the eyeball to bring this one back, click the eyeball on the copy layer to hide it. And then on the mask of the original, I'm going to erase him this time. So erase him. And when he's gone, then just click the eyeball back for his layer, because now this is his layer and this is hers. So we can go to our move tool and just plunk her up on the top here, looking like she's sitting kind of on the top of the books next to him. Okay, so before we move on, I just want you to take note of the fact that I've renamed all of my layers over here. And before I move on, I like to, at this point, I like to click on the top layer, hold Shift, click on my bottom layer of objects or subjects here, and then I'm going to go Control J to copy them all, and then I'm going to click on this folder right here and group them all into a folder. And then I'm just going to hide that folder at the bottom here, maybe even under my background if I want to unlock it and then bring it kind of down there. And then I'm just going to click the eyeball to hide it. I just like to do that just in case I mess up something going forward. Then I have all of my originals kind of hidden down here if I need them. Up till this point, we have cut out everything all at once, and then we've resized or scaled everything all at once. Moving forward, I'm going to deal with the shadows, highlights, depth of field, and blending of each of these characters one at a time. Okay, so the first one I'm going to deal with is this guy right here, and the first thing I'm going to do for each of these is going to be to get rid of the mask. So I'm going to click on the mask, right click on it, and then go Apply Layer Mask. And that's just going to make it so it's now one object, one layer with no mask on the outside. And then to make the shadow, you're just going to double click to the right of it over here, which brings up the layer style menu. Click on the word drop shadow, not on the box, so the word drop shadow, and then just play around with the size of your shadow here. So make sure opacity's up, and make sure these two are probably pretty far down. And you're just going to kind of mess with this so that you kind of have the shadow just along the outside around the perimeter of your subject, and then click OK. Now we'll have this drop shadow under effects will come up, right click on it and go create layer, which makes now we have a looking layer and we have a lookings drop shadow layer. On that lookings drop shadow layer, just go Control T, and we're going to scale this one down. But this time, make sure that this chain thing is unchecked. We don't want it checked this time, so we can just kind of squash it down like this. Now I'm going to inverse it. So I'm going to make it so the shadow is dropping down here a little bit, because technically the lamp here is shining a light on him and the shadow should be going off kind of in this direction. But obviously because of the books right here, there is another light that's shining at the books. Otherwise this would be really dark right here, but it's not. So there's some other light in the room that's shining here, which would also be shining on him, which means that this shadow would not be very prominent. You see here under the books, it's only like right at the very edge that there's this like curved edge of the book that we see a shadow under there, but there's no other kind of shadow right here really. Maybe a little bit right there from this lamp, but that's about it. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of crunch this in quite a bit, and then click check. Then I'm going to go up to edit, transform, and I'm just going to skew it a little bit. So I'm going to go to the bottom here where there's this little arrow pointing both ways and just kind of skew it in that direction just a little bit, just to honor the lamp, maybe a touch, and then click check. I'm going to use my arrow keys to kind of bump it into place, so somewhere around there. Then I'll go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and just kind of play around with what I want here. So I'm going to go maybe something like that and click OK. And then I'll even drop the opacity down just a touch because it's not going to be a very prominent shadow. However, because his feet are on the ground here, it still looks fake. Because remember, the book had like a really sharp dark spot here. So I kind of need that under his feet as well. So I'm going to zoom in. And then all I'm going to do here is I'm going to add my own shadow. So on this Lookings drop shadow layer, I'm going to get a brush. I'm going to make sure that it's a brush color that matches, that's like maybe this like dark here, or maybe even black. You can go with black. I'm going to pick this anyway and click OK. And then I'm going to shrink down my size so it's about the size of his feet, or like manageable kind of in that area. And I'm going to make sure my hardness is kind of around 25-30%, somewhere in there. And I'm just going to, underneath his feet, just darken some of that area up. Okay, and you might have to adjust your opacity. If it's too dark, then you might want to drop that down a bit. And then same with on this side. I'm just gonna add some kind of darkness around his feet. And then if I need to, I can go back in with maybe even an eraser and kind of get rid of some of the extra stuff that, you know, wouldn't be on top of his foot. It would be underneath, right? So maybe something like that. And then when I zoom out now, it looks a little bit better under his feet, but I can also go back to my arrow, my move tool, and just kind of nudge it and kind of tuck it in where I think it looks the best. You know, go back in with the eraser tool and fix that up as well. Now, besides the shadow at the bottom, there also might be a shadow on the opposite side, or kind of a darker spot on the opposite side of the light, and then highlights on the front, like the side that's facing the light. So the tool we're going to use for that is we're going to click on our main layer, so on the actual looking layer, and right where this hand is here, so there's the burn tool and the dodge tool. So I'm actually going to start with burn, and all this is this allows you to kind of darken the edge of your subject. So I'm going to start on the jacket here because it's pretty obvious. So when I click and just kind of paint in there, you can see it kind of darkens it. So I'm just going to kind of darken along where I think shadows might be. So along this side of his pants, the light is shining from over here, so it might be a little bit darker over on this side. And then his feet down here might not get the same amount of light, so I'm going to kind of darken that a little bit as well. Even kind of the back side of his head over here. Okay, so just kind of like that. Maybe that was too much. Control Z to go back a bit. And then the other side where the light is facing, I'm going to right click and go to the dodge tool. And this side is the side that the light is hitting. So if I now paint over this side, I can kind of brighten his face up, you know, whatever, that's what he's actually looking into the light here. So to add a little bit of kind of glow on that side of him. Okay, so that would be the light shining from this side. And then the last thing for him is that he's in a blurry zone over here. So he's further back, so he should be out of focus. He should not be in focus. So we're going to go back to, stay on his layer. I'm going to go back to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and obviously not that blurry. I'm going to just adjust this so he seems like he's of similar blurriness to whatever else is along kind of this plane. So I think that looks pretty good right there, maybe a touch more, and then click OK. Now when we look at him, if we zoom out, we can see that he's a little bit blurry there. We can see that the light is kind of glowing on this side of him from the lamp, and this side is a little bit more shaded, and then he has his shadow down at the bottom. Okay, so next up we're gonna quickly go through the basketball guy here because his is very much the same as what we did for this looking guy over here, but a little bit easier. There's not as much to do for his. Okay, so on the basketball guy, so I'm gonna go to my move tool, I'm gonna click on him, and we're gonna do the same thing we did before. We're gonna right click here and apply his layer mask. So now it's just this object right here, so just him with no layer mask. and we are going to make the shadow. So we double click over here, then we go to drop shadow, click on the word. It should be the same settings as before, so it should look pretty good. Click OK, and then we're gonna right click on drop shadow, go to create layer, which makes this basketball guy's drop shadow layer. We're gonna click on it, go Control T, and make sure this chain is unclicked, and we're gonna flip this upside down as well, and just kind of bring this one, I'm gonna go kind of like right here, maybe something like that, squash it, nah, I'll keep it about like that, click check, and then I'll go edit, transform, and go back up to skew, and just get the arrows pointing both ways. I'm just gonna skew it this way just a little bit again, maybe even back like that, and click check, then go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm gonna bring it up a little bit, maybe like that, click OK, and then drop the opacity down a bit. So we just have a little tiny bit of a shadow underneath him, and that should be okay, maybe even less. I'll drop it down even a little bit less, so that now when we click the eyeball to see that's without it, that's with it. I forgot to do that for this guy as well. So if I go back up to the top here, click the eyeball, that's without the shadow, that was with the shadow. Okay, so that's good enough for him for the shadow. And then really all we're gonna do here is the highlights and shadows for him. So I'm gonna go back to basketball guy, like his actual layer, go over here to the whatever this looking thing is here for dodge tool, but I'm gonna start with burn. I'm gonna go to this side, maybe burn a little bit on this side. And you can always adjust, hardness and size and exposure and the range that you're dealing with. I'm just gonna keep it at midtones. I'm not a master at this, but I think that's all I kind of need here is just a little bit of kind of darkness on the opposite side of the light, kind of darken in underneath here maybe a little bit, and then not on the ball. I'll leave the ball like that, and then I'll switch over to the dodge tool and I'll brighten up some of this side. So just a little bit here, a little bit more on his shirt, quite a bit on his hair because it's really close to the light, and then a little bit on his hand and the ball up there. Okay, so kind of brighten that side up right there. And then I'll do the exact same thing for the backboard here. So for the backboard, I'm not going to create any other shadow or anything here. So I'm just going to right click and apply the layer mask. And then it's going to be a lot of I'm going to provide a lot of light on just this edge, and then maybe drop my exposure down even more to get a little bit down into the middle, maybe even a little bit more over there. And I'll bring the brush size up. Whoops, that's obviously way too much. Bring it up so that I'm just maybe doing one coat over there. So it just brightens it up just a touch. So I have a little bit of a gradient from bright to dark over there. Maybe that's even too much. Yeah, maybe like that, a little bit softer of a transition. And then just so we make sure that we are staying consistent with our depth of field, we can see that this post here for the lamp is also out of focus a little bit. So we have to do the same thing with the backboard. So I'm going to click on the backboard, go up to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. And that's probably good. I'm not going to do it too much, just a little bit like that, 2.5 maybe. So it kind of looks like it matches the same blurriness as the post, and click OK. Okay, so next up we have these two, and I'm not going to deal with both of them. I'm just going to maybe edit just him, and it'll be the exact same. So whatever you do for him, you do for her as well. So I'm going to click on him, and we're going to right click again and apply our layer mask. So that's just his layer. We're going to double click over here, go to drop shadow. Everything should be perfectly good right now. Click OK. Then right click on drop shadow, click create layer, and we have his drop shadow right here. Now, the difference here is that we don't want it to be all the way around, but we do want kind of some of this around here. So all I'm going to do is nudge this way a little bit, to the right a little bit, so that more of the shadow is on this side, like on one side of his, because the light is over here. So I'm going to leave this kind of lit up a little bit more, so there's not really any shadow over there. But we really don't want any shadow up here, because it's not going to cast a shadow way back there. It would just be on maybe the top of this book or the side, and this is just in mid-air. So I'm actually going to erase some of this shadow to start. Okay, so I'm going to be on the shadow layer. I'm going to go over to the eraser, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, with the hardness down, and I'm just going to erase up here the shadow because there wouldn't be any above the books. So everything above here is going to be gone, and then everything below this one, because it's not actually touching anything over here either. Okay, so like that. Oh, there is a little bit of the book right there. So maybe if I go Control Z, maybe not all of that, kind of take away all of this here and leave a little bit back there. Okay, so that's a good start, but we'll do the same thing we kind of did with the feet over here. We're going to draw in or paint in some of our own shadow as well first. So on this shadow layer, going to go to the brush, make sure you have probably this time a black brush, click OK, and make sure you pick the size that you want, hardness way down, and we'll zoom in to kind of get a better look at what we are doing. Okay, so over here, I probably want to paint, oh, see, that's too harsh, right? So undo that brush. I'm going to bring my opacity down quite a bit, maybe, 35, 30% right there. So I'm going to paint some of that in on this shadow. I'm going to paint a little bit more in down here, give it a little bit, underneath, because as he's sitting here, there's definitely going to be a lot of kind of shadow. I might even give a whole kind of coat in there with a little bit kind of extra where he's sitting, and maybe even a little bit extra under here, because if the light's here, then we're not going to really see any of this, and then a chunk kind of maybe around his feet here as well. Okay, so something like that looks okay, but now in the inside of his pants and like all down here would also be a little bit darker as well. So we have to go back to our dodge and burn. So right here, I'm going to start at burn, and I'm just going to burn some of, whoops, not on the shadow layer, sorry, on the sit guy layer. So we want to just deal with kind of some of these areas that his arm or something might be covering that. So in this case, this brush, I would only use this size for maybe just a little bit of the edge of his kind of pants on right just along this edge, maybe even just a little bit along his pant leg on this edge, just quite a soft touch of that burn right there. Maybe some on his shoes down here that might be like the bottom of his shoes might not be, that bright, and this other leg might be covering this one right there. So I might burn some of that. And then I'm going to shrink this down and zoom in even more here and do some of the kind of underside here. But I don't want to get his hands, and I don't want to make, any of this dark because the light would still be on there. So just kind of the inside of his pant leg there, maybe here a little bit, and then if I can sneak in even smaller to do some like kind of in here a little bit. So kind of darken that just a bit right there. And then just like the other times, when you're done making your shadow, or do this before, you want to drop the opacity a little bit too to kind of get the level that you want. Okay, the next thing would be just to do the highlights now. So go back to the sit guy layer. We'll go back to this right here and go to dodge tool. And I'm just going to put a little bit of light on this side of his head, maybe shrink this down a bit and do a little bit more to like light up his hair up there. That was maybe too much. And maybe this side of his jacket a little bit. So just to add a little bit of kind of highlights over here, because this is where the light is shining from. So a little bit kind of brighter into his hair there, and that's probably good enough. All right, so last but not least is the swimmer guy, but this one's a little bit different because we're not gonna just immediately right click and apply the layer mask, because we have to adjust kind of the edge of all of this water here to make it blend in a little bit better. So to do that, I'm gonna click on the mask, then I'm gonna go over here to the brush, make sure I have a black brush, and I'm gonna put the opacity at 80%, something like that. Have it a fairly large brush and the hardness right down. And I'm just gonna paint along the edge. So I'm just gonna get rid of all the kind of harsh edges that are along the edge of the water that touch the table. So don't worry about how great it looks right now. Just get rid of all of the harsh edges as fast as you can. Okay, so something like that. So now we're gonna go back to a white brush and drop the opacity now to more like 40% and just start painting back in over the spots that you just got rid of. And because your brush is so blurry, it's going to make a kind of nice transition out to where the water transitions into the table. So even something like that, you can go back if you need to, go back to black and maybe even eliminate a little bit some of the edge that you just added in to kind of soften it up even more. So, do whatever touch-ups you need to, and then we'll go over here, right click and apply the layer mask. Once you do that, then you can just apply any of the other touch-ups with your dodge and burn and whatever that you need to. But in this case, I'm just gonna leave the swimmer guy alone because he's being lit up by the window mostly, and I think he just looks kind of good being kind of dark down there by himself. Now, the last thing we're gonna deal with is making sure that we match the brightness and darkness / contrast and color of each of our subjects here. So to make sure that they look like they're in the same space under the same lighting. Okay, so to do that, we're gonna add 2 adjustment layers. So the first one here, so make sure you're clicked on the layer that you want to adjust. So I'm just gonna adjust her layer because we haven't dealt with anything with her layer yet. So I'm gonna click on her, and then I'm gonna click on this little half circle thing right here, adjustment layer. I'm gonna add color balance, and I'm gonna click on it again and add levels. So obviously color balance is gonna deal with our color, and levels is gonna deal with the brightness and darkness / contrast of each of our images. So for this one, we have to go up here, and if you want to adjust them all at the same time, then you put them at the very top. So you'd bring these to the very top. But I just want to impact just her layer here. So I have to make sure that when I'm clicked on this over here, click on the word levels, you're going to click on this thing right here, which is a clipping mask. So there, and I'm going to click on color balance and click on my clipping mask. That means that this levels is only going to impact her layer, and color balance is only going to impact her layer only. Okay, so let's deal with color first. So let's just pretend this image was a little bit even more blue, or cyan. Then you'd want to adjust to kind of make it match with the lighting. So in this case, I'm just going to slide it a little bit yellow because she's very close to this yellow light. So she'd probably have a little bit more of a yellow hue to her than not, right? So it wouldn't be as blue, like pinky purple. I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow to her right there. And I'd probably do that for most of them, maybe just not this guy because he's more like the window light right here. And then for levels, this is where you're just playing around with these. So this one will make your darks darker. This one will make your lights lighter. And this one adds contrast. So I can kind of add a little bit of contrast back to her there. And then this one will make your darks lighter, and this one will make your lights darker. Okay, so I'm going to leave those 2. I just added a little bit of contrast, and then maybe, I don't know, that's probably good enough. Maybe a little bit brighter for her, but probably not. Just the contrast like that looks pretty good. So let's look at the 2 eyeballs here. So if I click this eyeball, that was before, and that's after I added the lightness, darkness, and contrast to it. So it just sharpens it up a little bit. And then this was before color change, and this was after. So I would go through and make sure that you adjust each image to make it match accordingly. Okay, and there we go. That's how you would make a miniature composite in Photoshop. If you got something out of this video, make sure to drop a like. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and I'll catch you next time.